This April, in the midst of the fasting month, the Sultan of Malaysia gave a reminder to Muslims in his country not to allow mosques to turn into political arenas.
So there is this competition on what I call Muslim politics, competition on who gets to speak on Islam in Malaysia.
The Sultan's warning comes on the back of rising religious populism in the country.
This rise of Islamic consciousness, identity consciousness, wanting to assert one's Muslim identity, it has led to a situation where there's less mixing of the communities.
Malaysia has long taken pride in its status as a moderate and a tolerant Muslim nation.
It's a nation which accommodates the legitimate expectations and aspirations of the Muslim community in wanting to see Islam in the public sphere, but with guardrails to ensure that the minorities are protected.
As religion plays a more prominent role in society and self, can Malaysia avoid the cynical aspects of identity politics?
You could see all around the globe, not only the case of Muslims and Islam, but people will make use and abuse religion just to get votes, just to get to power.
All her life, 40-year-old Natasha Hudson has struggled with her identity as a Muslim woman. With mixed parentage, the Malaysian entrepreneur often finds herself torn between the alluring culture of the West and her Islamic traditions. She became famous at a very young age, working both as a model and as a TV actress.
I was in school, I used to want to be so close to the religion. I wanted to find my identity. I wanted to understand and learn so many things. And then I feel that I was given the opportunity to meet so many great scholars at such a young age.
But money, fame, and several relationships left her feeling unfulfilled. As an adult, she turned to Islam for a sense of purpose.
In 2012, I made my first pilgrimage, which was to Mecca and Medina, and at that time I was feeling totally empty. I had everything in this life, meaning I had all the wealth, I had all the fame, but there was something truly missing.
As Natasha re-encountered her faith, she became more religiously conservative. She started wearing a full niqab. The headdress and veil are worn by Muslim women as a sign of piety and modesty. Natasha also withdrew herself from public life.
That transition was, how it started was I was going to so many Islamic events, and I wanted to find an escape route where I didn't want to be disturbed or noticed. And I felt that let's just don the niqab for events. That's how it started. I think I felt I was at peace, meaning there was no disturbance.
But her self-imposed social isolation only lasted 3 years. Today, she owns an archery business with her husband. For personal reasons, she removed her veil in 2019 and began adopting more modern dress styles again. But she faced criticism when she removed her headdress.
In my work, especially when I do live sessions on social media, I still get so many people asking or criticizing, why did I take off the niqab? Or say stuff like, didn't she wear the niqab? What happened? And then start lecturing me. And I've actually come to the point where I don't feel anything anymore. I don't feel anything anymore. It doesn't make me less of a Muslim, because the way I bring up my children has always been, religion is always first as well.
Natasha's experience mirrors the struggles over Islamic identity in Malaysia. While founded as a secular state, Malaysia's 1957 constitution places Islam as the federation's main religion. It also defined a Malay person as someone who professes the religion of Islam, speaks the Malay language, and practices Malay customs.
In fact, I would argue that the most powerful identity marker for the Malays would be Islam. And since the 70s, this has become more and more pronounced. Malay awareness of identity and Malay attempts to express their identity through Islam.
In a 2015 survey conducted by independent pollster Merdeka Center, most Malays identified themselves as Muslim first. 27% identified themselves as Malaysians, and only 6% of them identified themselves first as Malays. Religion has become the core of Malay identity.
And the best example of this in our context would be the rapid spread of the hijab in Malaysia. It has been more rapid and more dramatic than perhaps in any other society in the world, how quickly this had caught on. Someone did a comparative study of the spread of hijab in Malaysia and the hijab in Cairo and Egypt, which is an Arab country, right in the heartland of the Arab Muslim world. And yet, the spread of the hijab was much more rapid here because it was connected with identity consciousness, trying to sort of say, this is our identity.
And Malaysia is bucking the global trend. In multiple studies, young people around the world are eschewing their faiths. Gen Zs tend to be the least religious group, followed by millennials. Yet in Malaysia, religious fervour could be growing among the young. According to a 2011 survey by Merdeka Center, almost 3/4 of Malaysian Muslim youth wanted the Quran to replace the constitution. By 2022, the number increased to 82%, though some feel the findings should be taken with a grain of salt.
But the same survey, when asked whether or not they read the Quran or regularly read the Quran, I think the answer was, less than 20% regularly read the Quran. So I think it's an aspiration that young people have, but I think when the cold reality of becoming an adult in this world dawns upon them, they do understand that we need a constitution that we have right now, which is a man-made constitution.
32-year-old Ariz Ramli, more popularly known as Caprice, is a hip-hop artist, entrepreneur and influencer. He's been called Malaysia's bad boy, though you wouldn't know it if you met him as a teen.
After high school, I graduated with an IB, International Baccalaureate, had good grades, was supposed to study in the US, but I ran away from home. Obviously, my parents at that point in time, bear in mind, my whole family are government servants. So when you have a boy that suddenly wants to rap, they were very, very angry. I guess as a kid, obviously I think every kid is rebellious.
Caprice does not fit the mold of a conservative Muslim. But Caprice is among the young Muslims proudly proselytizing their faith. Caprice actively promotes Islam through his Jihad in Education program. He also developed an app to help improve the Quran reading technique. On Instagram, he speaks out, sometimes controversially, against injustices suffered by Muslims to his 1.4 million followers.
I think every Muslim has a duty to defend Islam. I'm just a Muslim doing my duty. That's how I look at it. How the Palestinians were oppressed, discriminated. They had an apartheid system of governance, and that sort of ignited this jihad inside of me to always fight for Palestine and Islam.
This idea of defending Islam could perhaps explain a controversial event that took place in February. Men donning makeshift armor, brandishing handmade swords, and bearing Islamic sigils marched near a resort in Terengganu. They were members of a youth wing of the Malaysian Pan-Islamic Party, or PAS. Some Malaysians saw this as political and religious intimidation. Home Minister Saifuddin Nasution Ismail condemned the march, saying strict action will be taken against any element that threatens the order, harmony and security of the people. Meanwhile, PAS categorized the march as cosplay.
Trying to bring people to the ways of Islam is of course commendable from the perspective of Muslim, but the negative aspect is I think the emphasis has been placed in the wrong place, right? The emphasis has been wrong, which is more on this outward Islamization, dressing a certain way, speaking a certain way, instead of looking at what Islam really is.
For Caprice, the matter was overblown.
There's a march in Norway every year where a bunch of Vikings with axes, swords and shields, they march every year, no problem. There's a march every year, very scary, of devils, ghosts, people with horns. It's called Halloween, sometimes led by little children, but a bunch of grown men wearing some cheap theater outfit in Terengganu is supposed to scare us.
But the issue goes deeper than that. The procession occurred at a time when PAS was at its political peak. It had emerged from last year's general election with 49 seats, the most of any party. Some saw PAS's surprise victory, called the Green Wave for their party colours, as the undeniable influence of religion on politics.
And I think it reflects PAS's belief that they are very strong now. We are now at the forefront. We can do what we want. And what we want is this Islamic society.
But Islam is not monolithic. From the fundamentalist Salafi movement to Indonesia's nativistic Islam, Nusantara, the religion finds different expression in society. The question then is who gets to define Islam for Malaysia? "34-year-old Amin Khidir has just picked his daughters Nawal and Nuha up from school. He's chosen to enroll them in an Islamic school, also known as a madrasah.
Saya menghantar anak-anak saya ke sekolah yang background Islam kerana nakkan ilmu yang balance dan seimbang daripada academic sekolah dan juga Islamic studies untuk anak-anak saya lah.
Islamic schools typically devote a portion of their curriculum to religious study. For this reason, there is a perception that Islamic schools are not as academically sound as mainstream ones. But this bias has begun to shift. Amin himself graduated with a degree in Islamic finance and Sharia law from Yarmouk University in Jordan. He's now working as a banker, and he wants his children to embark on a similar path.
Tapi bukannya kita nak limitkan mereka untuk menjadi ustaz ataupun ustazah. Malah dah terbukti ramai yang kita boleh cakap profesional ustaz lah. Mereka ni boleh bekerja di bank-bank, di syarikat-syarikat korporat, tetapi background mereka ialah Islamic school. Mereka ada kedua-duanya lah, jadi itu merupakan kredit bagi mereka lah. Baik dari segi Islamic teaching dan juga cemerlang dalam academics.
All praise to Allah.
The same sentiment is also shared by Azlan Shah, CEO of Arba Foundation. It's an organization which educates underprivileged children to help them escape the poverty trap. Like Amin, Azlan is also a graduate of Islamic schools.
In Malaysia, we have more than 7 types of Islamic school. starting from a very specific memorizing Quran only school to a very modern, to a very multidisciplinary Islamic school. So when we were studying, even most of the graduates of my school are not in the Islamic studies field. They are engineers, they are doctors, lawyers, and in all sort of fields. So, but they are working, they are growing in their career with having that Islamic worldview that differs maybe from those who not experience that kind of education.
As more Malaysians embrace their religious identities, the demand for Islamic schools has grown. The number of Muslim youths attending religious schools has jumped from 48% in 2010 to 60% last year. To cater to this demand, private madrasas, mostly funded by private individuals, has sprouted up. Some 900 new private Islamic schools were opened between 2011 and 2017 alone.
The parents we have today, they were the kids back then, right? Say they grew up in this rising Islamization or this Islamic society in Malaysia. So they grew up there. So when they become parents at this age, so they can't help but feel that in a way it's necessary to continue and to send their kids to more Islamic school.
This rising Islamic consciousness has also led to the mushrooming of unregulated madrasas. They are like this unregistered Tafiz school in the North Malaysian state of Kedah. The school specialises in the memorization of the Quran. Because these schools are unregistered, they have limited access to funding, despite the demand for their services.
Masalah yang kita hadapi sekarang ni itu masalah kewangan lah kan, untuk kita urus takbir sekolah kita. Masalah kita masalah kewangan. Sebab kita anak-anak tahfiz di sini walaupun dikenakan yuran tapi kebanyakannya tak bayar lah. Dia orang tak bayar yuran. Dalam 20% je yang bayar. Yang lain tak bayar lah. Lepas tu kita masalah lah untuk kita takbir sekolah kan. Tapi kita ambil cara lain, kita dengan cara saya kita buat macam ternak kambing lah kan, bela kambing, bela kerbau untuk kita jadikan sebagai sumber pendapatan sekolah. Kita teruskan perjuangan kita ni sebab kita nak Islam ni terus berkembang.
The resurgence of Islam in Malaysia started way back in the 1970s and continued well into the 80s. Dr. Mahathir Mohamad became Prime Minister in 1981, and in 1983 he established the International Islamic University of Malaysia. It's designed to inject Islamic values in the Malaysian way of life. The state-led Islamization program also included the creation of an Islamic bank and a religious bureaucracy.
I would argue that's the political element of it, trying to introduce an Islamic university, not just for the sake of what we call this Islamization of knowledge project, but also to, as a counter-narrative to PAS, to show that, look, we are just as Islamic as you are, because we contributed to the building, to the creation of the Islamic University in Malaysia, so how can you accuse us of being less Islamic?
Dr. Mahathir was trying to outflank PAS, a splinter group from UMNO made up of Islamists. By appealing to religion, PAS won the state of Kelantan in 1959. It briefly lost the state to Barisan Nasional in 1978, only to recapture it in 1990, holding it till today. As global events in the 1970s and 80s created a rising Muslim consciousness, UMNO, led by Dr. Mahathir, pivoted.
Iranian Revolution, and others would be the Petro-Saudi dawah or Islamic propagation. The war between Russia and Afghan did also contribute towards the level of religious awareness amongst maybe Muslims in Malaysia or globally.
Dr. Mahathir must have seen that there was this rising Islamic consciousness among young activists, and he felt that he needed to, one, co-opt some of these political activists who were identifying themselves as political Islamists into UMNO and into government. And of course, the most famous political activist that he co-opted is now the Prime Minister, Anwar Ibrahim. It made sense for him to strengthen his position to ensure that the preeminent political competitor in the Malay sphere at that point in time and now, which is the PAS, the Islamic Party of Malaysia, was kept at bay.
PAS retaliated by attacking UMNO to show its Islamic credentials. It called UMNO leaders infidels for not adhering to the true Islamic principles. At the same time, it fought for the introduction of the Hudud laws, prohibitions against sinful acts like apostasy, adultery, and drinking alcohol. PAS also pushed for the creation of an Islamic state in Malaysia. And the strategy worked. In the 1999 general election, PAS won a record 27 parliamentary seats. It also captured the state of Terengganu. But the constant battle between the two parties had the unintended effect, pushing religion further to the right.
Is that political power of trying to out-Islamize one another. So when you have these two sides talking about Islam, it can't help but affect the rest of society, that they see this as the norm.
To seed the ground, PAS began establishing religiously oriented schools since the 80s. Like this Islamic secondary school in Kedah. The teaching staff of this school are all made up of PAS members. But according to the principal of the school, Zulkarnain Ishak, a PAS-run madrasah is not meant as a recruitment vehicle.
Dalam sistem pengajian akademik kita pun, kita tidak pernah mengajar dan memaksa guru untuk mendoktrin pelajar dengan kefahaman PAS Islam. Apa yang kita ajar ialah kefahaman Islam yang sebenar, akademik yang cemerlang, dan bagaimana satu hari nanti mereka akan berada di dalam masyarakat dan membantu umat.
Saya kira PAS menyediakan satu wadah pendidikan ini bukan akhir sekali untuk memilih PAS. Kerana kita tidak tahu umur PAS ini sampai bila.
But a former party insider refutes this. Mr. Khalid Samad was previously part of PAS's Central Committee. He left the party to form Amanah, following disagreements with PAS leaders over the party's political direction. Amanah is part of the current Pakatan Harapan government.
It started off from the kindergartens, preschools, and the religious schools and all that. So this obviously gives the students a very strong religious foundation, but at the same time a bias, a political bias, where they are made to believe that only PAS is Islamic, all the rest are not. In the final analysis, people will use their brains, they can see what's happening, they can read, they can get a lot of facts and figures, and they can analyze for themselves.
People sending kids to religious school is not a new thing. And not only PAS members only who send their kids to this kind of school. However, I wouldn't deny that a certain political party would benefit from this, tap into the religious Islamic consciousness. People crave for religion, and it can be easily exploited.
To counter conservatism, Mahathir's successor, Abdullah Badawi, introduced the concept of Islam Hadari, or contemporary Islam. It was a moderate interpretation of the religion to allow the country to be part of global progress. He was pilloried by hardliners. Conversely, the next Prime Minister, Najib Razak, took a different tact. He voiced support for PAS's move to introduce the Sharia bill in 2016 in a bid to consolidate the support of Muslim voters.
Religion has been always used and abused, not only by Islamic parties or parties that are inclined toward religion, even sometimes parties who are not really religious, they're using religion when it comes to the situation where religion could become a commodity to get the votes.
Some political parties or some group capitalize on the leverage of Islam in order to gain popularity, yes. That is actually the essence of political Islam. And that is the essence of the Islamic populism.
With PAS emerging from GE15 as the biggest winner, has religious populism become the winning strategy now in Malaysia? And could it push Malaysia's politics further towards the right? It's the weekend. For 38-year-old Charlene Anthony, communications manager at a multinational company, it's time for her to rest and unwind after a hectic week at work. Her job requires her to interact with people of different races and religious backgrounds. That's where she learns how to appreciate their unique cultures, values, and traditions. She's seen some Malay colleagues adopt more conservative practices recently.
Conservatism to me is, having very specific values. There's a set of values to it. There's a set of intentions to it. Extremism, that narrative, the word extremism already has negative connotations to it. We've seen it from history, right? So from Hitler to the Taliban, that's extremism. Conservatism is just embracing your culture, your certain values, who you are as an individual. I don't see that as a bad thing.
Many outside observers, especially in the West, view Islamic conservatism with a certain sense of alarm. When the photos of the PAS march circulated on social media, there was a quick reach for the extremism narrative. Former Minister Khairi Jamaluddin cautions against conflating the two.
Let's not confuse religious conservatism or conservative views in Islam with terrorism and extremism. That line, I think, we are very clear about. And I understand there is this stereotype that perhaps international observers, even some of our neighbors, want to peddle, saying that conservative forms of Islam will lead to extremism and terrorism. That's not true, and that doesn't have to be the case at all. There's an increased Islamic consciousness among Muslims in Malaysia, and what's wrong with that? People want to become more observant of their religion. People want to become more religious. People want more Islamic values in their lives. This happens not just in Malaysia, but in other Muslim countries as well. So to categorize it as Islamic populism, green wave, and something that is threatening is, I think, doing disservice to the fact that many Muslims in Malaysia want religion, the religious values, to have a role in public life.
But for political analyst Chandra Muzaffar, conservatism becomes a problem if it's exclusionary, especially in multi-ethnic Malaysia.
I would say that on the negative side, this rise of Islamic consciousness has led to a situation where there's less mixing of the communities. Muslims feel that in order to protect their identity, they cannot send their kids to a non-Muslim home, for instance, or they cannot do certain things together, which they may have done in the past. That, I think, is very unfortunate, because that is not Islam. We know, for those of us who have tried to imbibe Islamic values and Islamic worldview, we know that Islam is very universal. It is not a religion that emphasizes ethnicity and communal boundaries and so on.
But the boundaries could be widening, used as a wedge in identity politics. In 2019, for example, UMNO joined hands with its one-time rival PAS in a political alliance known as Muafakat Nasional. The idea was to unite the Malays against the pluralistic Pakatan Harapan government led by Dr. Mahathir Mohamad. The second convergence of Malay nationalists and Islamist forces came just before the November 2022 election. PAS and Bersatu, two exclusively Muslim-based parties, formed the Perikatan Nasional coalition. According to reports, an estimated 54% of Malays voted for Perikatan Nasional in the 15th general election. Barisan Nasional, which once received the lion's share of Malay votes, only managed 33% support. Pakatan Harapan attracted an estimated 13% of the Malay vote.
Pada pendapat saya, parti-parti ini baik sama ada PAS ataupun UMNO, begitu juga dengan Bersatu. Parti-parti ini adalah parti yang berteraskan masyarakat Melayu. Jadi masyarakat Melayu melihat parti mana yang dapat berjuang untuk mengangkat kedudukan mereka, mempertahankan mereka, begitu juga berjuang untuk meletakkan hak-hak orang Melayu kena pada tempatnya.
If that sort of combination of Malay nationalism and Islam leads to a situation where you marginalize the non-Malays and non-Muslims, there will also be a tragedy for this country, because this country is multi-religious, multi-ethnic, and everyone has got a role to play, and you cannot marginalize the other communities.
Malaysia is a pluralistic nation. According to the 2020 census, about 63.5% are Muslims. The rest are Buddhists, Christians, Hindus, and others, or non-religious. Banking on religious populism for votes has its limits.
I think there is a limit also to PAS's political influence. Of course, they're doing very well now. They're the single biggest political party in the Malaysian parliament. They're bigger than the DAP, they're bigger than PKR in terms of single party representation. But PAS also knows that if they want to be accepted by the Malaysian public, they have to moderate their views as well. And I can say this because I served in government with PAS during the premiership of Tan Sri Mahidin and also the premiership of Datuk Seri Ismail Sabri. But at no point during cabinet discussions or during the preparation of cabinet papers did they insist on, for instance, bringing in additional Sharia laws, for instance, for criminal offences, which has long been their struggle or their objective and their agenda. They never mentioned it once.
Nonetheless, the outsized influence of religion on the political domain means that some progressive positions are off the table. For example, there was a huge uproar over the presence of LGBTQ groups during a women's march early this year. A police investigation followed.
My humble opinion, they're not doing anything wrong. They're human beings who have a specific lifestyle. Should they be penalized for that? I don't believe so. But I am still very aware that this is a Muslim country first and foremost. And we have to abide by its laws.
There's literally no room for discussion to talk about LGBT in a Muslim country. It's really weird. That's a conversation we can't even have. And it's not just a Muslim country. Which religion allows LGBT to happen? If you can explain that to me, then I'll give up. If you can name me one religion that endorses LGBT, then I'll give up. It's not a Muslim problem. It's every religion does not endorse LGBT. So for me, that's out of the conversation.
The current government appears to be more progressive, but in actuality, they are still in the realm of conservative politics. You can't suddenly one day wake up and say, oh yeah, we accept LGBT. It doesn't work that way in Malaysia. So even the current government, even including DAP, they are still conservative. in terms of their view of society, they are still conservative, just maybe less so than past. This crackdown on LGBT or other divergent religious, non-religious ideas, it's just a continuation. This is how Malaysia has always been, and I think this is how Malaysia will be for the foreseeable future.
From the evangelical voting bloc in the US to Hindu nationalism in India, religion plays an important role in identity politics. But could it be a winning strategy in Malaysia's all-important state elections? Politics has become an integral part of life for 32-year-old Muzaffar Mohammed. Even while he's at home, the district youth leader from the Islamic Party, PAS, would discuss local politics with his friends and party activists. Muzaffar was once a member of UMNO. He joined the party 14 years ago at the age of 18. He was swayed by the belief that UMNO was the only party which fought for the rights and interests of the Malays in the country. But he felt cheated at the end and decided to leave the party abruptly in February this year.
UMNO ditendang sebulat-bulatnya pada pilihan raya umum 15 selepas isu-isu ini timbul. Dengan isu-isu sebaliknya, rasuah dan kredibiliti pemimpinnya. Paling kuatnya adalah isu-isu rasuah itu tersebut. Isu-isu ini dimainkan oleh parti-parti pihak lawan sebelumnya, tetapi menjadi satu jawapan yang betul apabila kes-kes rasuah tersebut telah dibicarakan dan dapat jawapannya.
Muzaffar was referring to the corruption scandal involving former Prime Minister and UMNO President Najib Razak. In July 2020, Najib was found guilty of misappropriating monies from the state investment fund 1MDB. On the back of the charges, Malay voters jumped ship. The opposition coalition, Perikatan Nasional, led by PAS and Bersatu, then went on to capture a stunning 74 seats in the November 2022 election. 49 of them were won by PAS. It was almost a threefold increase from what it achieved in the 2018 polls. UMNO, on the other hand, won a paltry 26 seats.
Rakyat sebenarnya muak tentang isu-isu berkaitan dengan penyalahgunaan kuasa, begitu juga dengan rasuah, integriti dan sebagainya yang saya kira telah pun menurunkan tahap sokongan kepada BN khususnya.
PAS gains at the polls fueled talks of the so-called green wave and the rise of right-wing politics in the country. But it can be difficult to pass how much of the party's surge is due to rising religiosity or a rejection of UMNO.
There's no doubt at all that the reason why PAS has become stronger is because UMNO has declined. That's the relationship between PAS and UMNO. It has been shown over and over again in our history. Whenever UMNO loses support among the Malays, when UMNO is seen as a party which has not lived up to Malay expectations, PAS will do better.
It's just that Malays didn't want to give UMNO the vote, so they had to give somebody else the vote. And that was by default Perikatan Nasional, which is PAS or Bersatu. And PAS and Bersatu were seen by default as cleaner than UMNO.
PAS is now basking in newfound confidence. Its leaders have even defied decrees issued by the country's 9 sultans prohibiting the use of mosques to spread political messages. A position recently reiterated by the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, the country's monarch, and earlier by Sultan of Johor. As per the constitution, the sultans are the custodians of Islam in Malaysia. Yet PAS leader Abdul Hadi Awang insisted there is nothing wrong with politicians preaching. To him, politics and religion in Islam are inseparable.
It seemed that the royal family is on the government side, so PN is coming up and challenging the royal family, challenging the Sultan. But more than that, I think what it shows to Malaysia is that we have these multiple voices in Malaysia that speaks on Islam, speaks about Islam. So there is this competition on what I call Muslim politics, competition on who gets to speak on Islam in Malaysia. So Hadi is sending a signal that says, you know what, yeah, you're the Sultan, but you're not the only one who can speak on Islam. I come from a political party, I'm an ulama, I have knowledge, I have experience, I can speak on matters on Islam as well. So I think that's the signal that he's trying to say, that Islam is up for grabs. Anyone can speak and claim to defend Islam in Malaysia.
I would say yes, Islam has its place in politics. People derive principles and values which are universal to guide and to be the compass of how should one govern and understand nation and nation building. But the problem lies on how certain groups or certain individuals weaponize it and closed all other dialogues and interpretation as to how Islam should be understood and to be practiced. If you support us, your religiosity at a certain level. If you don't support us, your religiosity is at question. That is something very unhealthy, unwanted and uncalled for.
The controversy took place ahead of important state elections later this year. It'll involve 6 states: Selangor, Negeri Sembilan, Kedah, Kelantan, Terengganu and Penang. These are the states which opted to sit it out in the last election. PAS will be eager to show that its GE15 triumph was not a fluke.
Sudah pastilah kalau di pihak kerajaan yang dipimpin oleh Perikatan Nasional, PAS khususnya, tekad untuk mempertahankan negeri yang dikuasai oleh parti masing-masing dengan majoriti yang selesa dan merancang untuk mengambil alih negeri yang dirasakan dapat majoriti di negeri-negeri tertentu. Baki lagi 3 tu Selangor, Negeri Sembilan dan Pulau Pinang. Mungkin Pulau Pinang agak susahlah, tetapi mengurangkan majoriti 2/3.
The state election will also be an important barometer of support for Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim. His unity government, comprising PH, UMNO and the East Malaysian parties, have had their legitimacy repeatedly questioned by their opponents.
My prediction is status quo. That is my prediction, that PN will keep on in power up north, and Selangor and Penang will still be under PH. But I feel like Penang and Selangor especially are going to lose some seats to PN. So I think PH will win, but reduce majority. That's my prediction. So it's difficult for PN to win over the Chinese and Indians, so that will stop them from getting majority.
It remains uncertain how the political pendulum will swing and how far. To be clear, modern Malaysia has never come close to the sectarian violence experienced by its neighbours. In 2017, militant groups linked to ISIS seized the city of Marawi in the Philippines, hoping to establish a caliphate. While in 2019, hardline groups protesting President Joko Widodo's victory in Indonesia led to violent riots. Most believe such extremism will not visit Malaysian shores.
If you look at Malaysia electorally, no political party can afford to become too extreme because it will not serve their interests. We're just not talking about ideals and principles and so on. We're just talking about real politics. It won't serve their interests to push things to the extreme, right?
Historically, Malaysian society was quite repulsive toward violence. Bulk majority of us actually believe in the peaceful coexistence, believe in moderation. Even though maybe we disagree at certain point, certain phase during the election, the sentiment is very high. And the political radicalization, for example, there are talks about the ethnic issue, religious issues. But after the election, situation returned back to normal.
And I'll be the first to speak out if there is a law or if there is anything that encroaches onto the rights of non-Muslims. But I believe that we should give Muslims who legitimately expect more Islamic values in their lives, the space to have that. I also do believe that if there are Muslims who don't want encroachment into private morality, I agree with that as well. So it's not a cut and dry picture here, but I think on balance, Malaysia has got it right now.
Until today, Natasha is still trying to come to grips with her own Islamic identity. But one thing is clear. She wants Malaysia to remain a moderate Muslim country, one that embraces liberal and progressive values, where all the communities can thrive and are free to exercise their rights and freedom, being part of the larger Malaysian nation.
I don't agree for it to be 100% conservative because we are surrounded by so many races, religion, and if you were to be chosen to be a Muslim leader is to set so much examples and to do justice, to show the act of kindness like the Prophet would have done to other religions and races.